My name is Ronnie Thomas. Currently, I'm a staff analyst with the Department of Health Services Housing for Health Division. And within my role within that position, I manage the system of care for the Office of Diversion and Reentry, enriched residential care. And so I manage a program for those that are exiting institutions of incarceration, such as LA County Jail, Linwood Females Jail. So all those type of institutions, I manage the placement of those clients.
Thank you so much and welcome again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Owens?
Hi, my name is Michael Owens. I'm the DHS Director of Medical Affairs and Administrative Support. I'm responsible for working with under the Office of Clinical Affairs, looking at all of the things ranging from how we are addressing the needs of our providers vis-a-vis the professional staff organizations, how we also look at the encounter capture and reporting of our encounter information to the health plans, looking at issues in terms of how we're going to actually gather data at the point of service delivery to make sure we can improve the accuracy and the complexity of the clinical information that we gather for the population across DHS. We also support the Office of Clinical Affairs through the administrative support structure for that organization.
My name is Monique Hedman. I am an intern at Harbor UCLA in family medicine. And I previously worked in public health, um, working with children and older adults primarily in New York City. I am working on different efforts to address vaccination rates here in the county among primarily among our Black residents. And I'm also a delegate for the Resident Union, CIR. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been working also, I have been leading efforts to create kind of safe spaces for Black resident and fellow physicians in LA County. And that's also very near and dear to my heart. So nice to meet all of you.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to start. I have 4 simple questions that I'm sure are just going to springboard us into a pretty lively conversation. And I'd like to start with it's June, it's Juneteenth coming up, to talk a little bit about the meaning, the symbolic meaning for you in Juneteenth. And I'll say, having grown up, I'm a child of West African and Nigerian immigrant. It didn't have the cultural, Juneteenth didn't have a cultural meaning to me until I was at San Francisco State. And in San Francisco, we knew due to the migration patterns from Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, in that area up to the Bay Area in the 1950s, when the shipyards, there's a lot of folks who celebrate Juneteenth. And that's where I learned, what is this amazing commemoration? And so I'd like to throw that out to anybody who would like to start our conversation. For you, what is the symbolic meaning of Juneteenth? Anybody like to take that?
I can begin. Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day. As the first generation born in my family of not being in Texas, Juneteenth is a very special day for me, for my family. We've always celebrated the day. It's a day of celebration, of family, of togetherness, of recognizing the ancestor struggle, and also recognizing the struggles to come. That if we can get through this bondage, the bondage that we are currently in, we will be able to overcome that. And so that's why we celebrate. That's why we wear red in honor of the ancestors. It's just, to me, it is just a special day. It is truly our 4th of July.
Monique, I see your head nodding there. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I agree with you in terms of how important it is for us to venerate our ancestors. Not only is it, a celebration of just how, our beauty in terms of our history and our culture as a people here, but then again, celebrating our resilience and just the fact, if the things that we've been through as a people, that it's just a reminder that we can literally do anything that we put our minds to, or anything that we're inspired to do, because our ancestors have survived. So there's so much. So what could possibly stand in our way of anything? And so for me, it is just a reminder of that resilience and strength and endless possibility.
I love that.
Uh,
Michael?
Well, I would say that I guess Juneteenth I became aware of in like 1970, which is the year I was a freshman in college, during the the Black Power movement and all of the things that were associated with it was when I became aware of Juneteenth. And I became aware of Juneteenth for a couple of reasons. One of which was there were some classmates of mine from Texas. My father, who was from Georgia, had mentioned it, but we had never celebrated it. But it became a sort of a rallying cry for us at that time. And it's remarkable to me for a couple of reasons because of what Juneteenth actually is historically, right? It's the date that I guess it was a U.S. Army officer named Granger arrived in Texas and apprised the Texas
Mhm.
slaves that they had been emancipated
Yeah.
by virtue of the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been issued. That was on, I think that was on January of 1980, 1865, and they had been emancipated since 1863, only because they were in the southern states and it was not known to them. So it also symbolizes to me work that wasn't done because the Emancipation Proclamation really spoke to freeing of the slaves in the slave areas. It did not speak to freeing the slaves in the non-Confederate areas. It wasn't until the 13th Amendment later that year, in December,
Mhm.
that slavery was abolished in the country. So it's to me it speaks to both. Um, it was an empowering rally cry for me back with my peer group. It speaks to the fact that it was a significant milestone of sort of jubilation,
Mhm.
and that it wasn't really a complete story, even as it was. But it was, as Ronnie says, jubilation. I mean, that's exactly how what the mindset of it evokes is jubilation.
Brings to mind this idea that we can change laws, but it doesn't necessarily change the actions on the ground, right? De jure, de facto, which, we think about the civil rights, the laws that were changed in the 1960s, and yet here we are still talking about racism because we are still living with racism. So pulling Juneteenth to now, to 2021, and looking back at this last year, what Juneteenth meant, particularly in the middle of the racial reckoning, the uprisings around the world last Juneteenth, and what's coming now here, right? A year later. What has changed? What has changed from last Juneteenth 2020 to Juneteenth 2021? If anything, what has changed?
Greater awareness, and as a Black professional, being able to speak up for the first time and actually have your voice not just heard, but recognized. And that is what I would really say, as far as professionally, what has been the outcome of this year of reckoning. Being able to speak, coalesce, and actually push forward with an agenda of anti racism. So to me, that is what has been able to come.
Um, I think that when we have these conversations, it's sort of like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Mhm.
Um, to a certain degree, I think people are definitely opening their eyes, and we've been kind of screaming at the top of our lungs at the mountaintop about these things,
Mhm.
and people who have kind of refused to acknowledge it were kind of forced to acknowledge it. And I do agree that you know you uh, you're able to kind of walk differently in these spaces. Somewhat in terms of being able to talk freely about our experience here, um, and it's been somewhat um, not liberating, and also there's some joy in the fact that you have people that have expressed that they want to support you, they want to know more about uh, the history of what we've been seeing in this country. And like you said, kind of a reckoning, but it's also just a stark reminder of, again, how far we've come, but how far we still really have to go. Um, and so I think that the needle has been moved in a way that it has not previously, but this is just the very beginning of this conversation that needs to be had.
Do you, as I hear you speak, I think, is there a sense of hope? Is it tempered? Is it like you said that word, I can move differently, right? Is it a more hopeful space? What is that?
It's to be honest with you, there is hope, but it's really hard to hang on to that hope. Just to be not hard to hang on to it, but it is somewhat cautious optimism because for so long you're kind of been hearing kind of platitudes and surface level um, expressions of support, um, and so you want to feel like this is different, this feels different, but because there's been so much disappointment in the past, I kind of feel like I still have that. Like, is this really it? Like, are we really moving forward here, or is there more lip service? So I think definitely hope, but cautious optimism.
Absolutely. And
I
what
think
Dr.
that,
Hedman, oh,
go ahead, Ronnie.
oh no, and I was just going to agree with Dr. Hedman as far as just that cautious optimism, because we are products of the enslaved. We have had to carry so much burdens prior, and so to have just a true 100% hope and belief that everything will be all right and okay on the other side is very hard to have when you have just dealt with so much oppression. But we still have that intrinsic spirit that our ancestors had, that things will be better. Um, but it's cautious, but we do have that belief. And I just wanted to agree with Dr. Hedman.
I think that faith and belief is intrinsic to our survival story. Without that intrinsic sense of belief, we wouldn't be here today. And the thing that there's a couple of things. The issue of enthusiasm and hope as a result of what happened over the past couple of years of more publicly available real time depictions of horror um, are has catalyzed a group broader than the last time we went through um, a major upheaval in the country vis-a-vis race relations of the 60s and 70s. The distinction was that there were some um, uh, European Americans who joined in that effort at that period of time, and but it wasn't, I would say, anywhere near as visceral, as deep, or as broad as a number who are haven't been awakened at this time. And I also think, like then, the youth were the white youth who were active, but even now, I would say, across the board, the youth of not just the country, but the world
Mhm.
are more engaged than they were in the last major push. And so for someone like me, the sense of cautious optimism, which is very hard to ever get beyond, that is a reflective state in these matters. But the state of cautious optimism, to me, I think is more foundationally broader based than I've ever seen it. And I'm hopeful as a result of that, that is got more sustainability. But if you look at what happened in the 60s and 70s with the country's awakening and so-called affirmative action, and then the backlash against affirmative action that happened in the country, you see several cycles of that kind of pattern going back to, the Emancipation Proclamation, quite frankly. So I always am humored when people say that affirmative action didn't work or affirmative action was unfair. Affirmative action was was canceled because it worked so well.
Hmm.
Let's be clear. Affirmative action was canceled because it worked so well. People like myself, first generation collegians, who would have not been able to go to some of the so-called um, premier institutions in the country, not because of anything other than the color of my skin,
Mhm.
were able to go to these places. Many people went from backgrounds extremely impoverished, preparatory backgrounds, and managed to survive the rigor of some of the most difficult intellectual and academic environments in this country, much more so than people ever thought they would. So I don't believe affirmative action failed. Affirmative action was cauterized because it succeeded beyond the wildest imagination of many people. And it was like, oh, Sherlock, the cat's out of the bag. And if we don't put the cat back in the bag, we're going to have a hard time containing this um, scenario.
Mhm.
So, and whether we're looking at a very similar sort of reactive phenomenon, this so-called post-racial America thing, I never thought to be an African American president in my lifetime. I just never did. The fact that there was one poked the bear and said, all of a sudden, the issue of race may not be as significant as issue of class in many people's minds. And people have rather viscerally reacted to that. And I think there's this whole perception of the browning of America, the browning, the yellowing, the blackening of America, which has people very, very concerned that on a basis of sheer humanity, they will be evaluated like everybody else when the country has been built upon 400 years of privilege. And those 400 years of privilege didn't even include a great number of the people who are arguing to retain the status quo. So, nonetheless, um, I do still retain a sense of a glint in my eye that because of the youth of America, because of the browning, blackening, yellowing coloration of America, that there be a more equal playing field for the future. Time will tell.
I love how you talk about the cycles of advancement and then the retrenchment, and that we've seen this in history over and over again. Um, so when we come to this moment here, 2021, after this big push to, again, a racial reckoning of 2020, and here we are at mid 2021 at DHS with Black people feeling cautious optimism. What is needed to ground that optimism, to nurture that optimism, to make it not just be a glint in our eyes that disappears. What do Black people need to thrive here at DHS?
For me personally, I need someone that represents me. I need someone that looks like me on that organizational chart. I need someone that understands the communities that they're serving, not based on a book, but based on actual lived experience and actually walking the streets with the clients, eating at the same restaurants that the clients have eaten at before. That's really what I want. That's what will make DHS feel comfortable, because that would actually represent what the County of Los Angeles is. And that's a collective of individuals, not one hue, collective of individuals. And guess what? Some of those individuals look like me. And I really wish that they would be recognized and not tokenized, but recognized and for their actual work that that they have done, and be in the correct positions of leadership that are well deserved.
Um, I think for what I think is important is just, again, I think that the creation and acknowledgement of safe spaces is very important, and I think that that's something that DHS can support. But in the importance of having a safe space, also, creating a platform for our voices to be heard, for our opinions and perspectives on related matters as it pertains to efforts against as it pertains to anti-racism efforts and the like. True acknowledgement, creation of a platform to hear those thoughts, and real action. Taking our recommendations and perspective and transforming it into action, not just lip service, but creating real concrete plans to address the issues of the day and to address our concerns as it relates to our experience as employees and as it relates to the people that we serve.
I think it also starts with just a real understanding of where we are and how we are, and not just of the people of color, but of the white people in the enterprise. It really starts with a firm understanding of the concept of fundamental humanity. If we can start with a concept that fundamental humanity is the greatest grounder for all of us, um, and have the humility to acknowledge and recognize that in each other, we can then start to have a dialogue which is non-threatening, the safe spaces dialogue. Because the safe spaces dialogue is one that we will find ourselves in wanting to have safe spaces for ourselves. People who don't look like me and us will want to have safe spaces, so called, for themselves. But the safe space is not a safe space where we simply double down on um, who we are or what we are, but a safe space is where we can actually feel safe to talk about, you know, all of our vulnerabilities and all of our needs, and address them from the standpoint of commonality. If we can do that, that's where we start at DHS and understand that in that dialogue, we're talking about every echelon of DHS, from the uh, most privileged of us who look like us at DHS, and I have to be one of those by definition, to those who are um, the least privileged of us, who are many of our clientele who are um, have food, health, income, uh, labor challenges, and insecurities. If we can get all of us to acknowledge that it's our commonality that actually has us all here, and be able to talk to that without fear of of the pain that's involved in that, because we can't do it honestly without acknowledging that it's uncomfortable. If we can achieve that, then we can maybe do something sustainable, not just in our individual microcosms, but for DHS as a whole, and even for LA County as a whole. And from there, we can go from there.
So I'm hearing, you know, a group of needs for Black folks to move from cautious optimism to full-throated, full-bodied optimism is the need for safe spaces for Black folks, safe spaces, creating safe spaces by acknowledging one another's humanity and meeting each other as human beings. More than platitudes and proclamations, but concrete changes in the power structure, that seeing Black folks, as Ronnie said, represented in all layers of the organizational chart, the acknowledgement of Black labor, Black excellence.
Yes.
And it's not just in the workforce, that we're also looking at patients.
Mhm.
We're looking at participants in various programs.
And ensuring program development is actually culturally competent and reflective of those that are being served. But that goes hand in hand with ensuring the correct leadership is there in place to be able to develop programs that are culturally competent and reflective of the population that they're serving.
I'm curious about Black folks. We all, like here on this call, we all have different histories, different families, different subcultures. Black people are not a monolith. How do we see representation for the diversity within our Black community? How do you see that represented well in DHS? What might that look like? Diversity in role, diversity in background. We have Afro-Caribbeans, African Americans, right? Africans.
And I'll say this for the interaction that I've had with high level African Americans, they have been a running theme: educated, articulate, driven, and that is just a running theme in my professional history of the African Americans that I have had to interact with on high levels, and that's because we are not given handouts. We are not the first one chosen at the interview, the one that they just are just screaming to give the position to. Is our skills have made no other choice that they give the position that we are well deserved to have. And so for me, that's just the running theme. It's just Black excellence, especially the higher you go, you will see. Like when Dr. Owens was speaking, I was in awe, because that is just the Black excellence. When Dr. Hedman was speaking, in awe, that's the Black excellence, because I may not know them, but I know they had a struggle. I know that. I know that they didn't get those degrees just by sitting on their hands and waiting for someone to help them. I know that. I know that they had more people telling them no than yes. And this is our first time meeting. But that's the Black culture. That's what we know. That's what the Black professionals understand. They understand that we've all had a struggle, that we've all had to be three times as good just to be considered equal. So I just want to say that.
I think the issue of I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Hammond.
Please. Go.
Beauty before age. Please
that?
speak.
Okay. I think it's just such an interesting question, and it made me kind of reflect on, my journey, to medicine, my journey working in public health. I have come across and encountered so many just amazing surviving Black people of, like, as you mentioned, of multiple different backgrounds. Like myself, my father's side of the family immigrated from Jamaica. My mother's side of the family is from Houston, Texas. And
87.
so, I go to my mom's house and I'm gonna have, she's gonna make some fried catfish, and we're having them come over to my dad's house. We're gonna make some oxtails. It's amazing to be exposed to all those different cultural traditions. And then, there's people from all over, like you said, we have Afro Caribbeans, we have people from the continent, people who's, can trace their ancestry back here in the United States. We have so much diversity within this umbrella of Black. But frankly, even though like we come from such different backgrounds, unfortunately, so oftentimes what we find common ground in is the experience of oppression and racism. And no matter how different we are, that is something that we can talk about, that we have a commonality, that we have in common. But so I think acknowledging that no matter how diverse we are as a people, this is one thing that we all experience, oftentimes in the same way, and that experience in itself is not respectful of our diversity. Um, but then, also just a direct acknowledgement of the fact that yes, we do not exist in a monolith. When you're talking about diversity, when you're talking about let's say you want to see, more Black people, you want to recruit more Black people, you have to think about the different types of Black people that you are targeting. um you know you have to think about, um you have the folks that are the descendants of slaves and are limited in their ability to know who they are, in terms of their ancestors, or are limited in their ability to trace back their ancestry. That group has a different struggle. And that's the kind of thing that I think needs to be acknowledged. Um, and then also folks that can trace their ancestry back for thousands of years, for millennia. That's something to be celebrated. So I'm sorry, I'm just kind of just thinking off the top of my head here, but there's so much to unpack when you're talking about the diversity within the the African diasporic community. And there's such a rich conversation to be had about that. And again, it's about creating space and platforms for these conversations.
Space and
It's
platforms. Dr.
yeah.
Owens.
Well, it's. I think I mean, Dr. Haven said it quite well. I mean, it's the needs for intra-racial, so-called intra-ethnic um, acknowledgement of the unique needs are no less significant than interracial, right? Intraracial and interracial acknowledgments of differences, pathways, and needs should flow from the elemental understanding of us as humans and having intrinsic needs. And if we can approach from that standpoint, we don't have an artificiality about which part of the diaspora you're from. You have unique needs which are reflective of what that experience is. Also, to her point, however, of the fact that we have all suffered from the uniqueness of oppression goes to another level, which is you can identify a person of the African diaspora depending upon the degree of their coloration from a quarter mile away, a half mile away. As we used to say during my earlier age, if you have a high powered rifle with a scope on it, you can tell I'm Black from 2 miles away. You don't know which part of the diaspora I'm from, but I'm Black. And that is the filter through which we are seen by many parts of the white and dominant culture in this country and around the planet. So we have a commonality, and we have distinctions, and we can hold both of those simultaneously with our commonality and distinctions with the Black diaspora and our commonality and distinctions with people who are from different diasporas.
So I think as we come to a close, what brought us together was we were talking about Juneteenth and what I heard, and where it fits. Not just history isn't just something that happens in the past. We make history every day, and it's important to recognize the connections from history to today, because if we are ahistorical, we repeat the same mistakes. What we can learn from history. So coming back to Juneteenth and this idea of that so many of, almost all of you stated about the inherent in our spirit as Black people is the ability to hold on to hope and to rejoice and to celebrate amidst the tears, amidst the horror. Like, we can feel the horror, but we don't let it kill our humanity. We don't let it kill our humanity. So as I think about our work ahead of us, because we still have lots of work ahead of us, doing this EDIA initiative, moving into more equity, more diversity, more inclusion, and anti-racism here at DHS, how can we bring this spirit of life, of celebration into the work so it's not completely a struggle? Any ideas around that?
Well, at the risk of not trying to be trite, I mean, there is that classic refrain, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Amen. Can't argue with that. That's what we have to do, just continue to let our light shine. And that's really it, is it, to continue to let the light shine and never give up the fight, continue to persevere and continue to make noise, continue to speak, and just continue to let that light shine, as Dr. Owen said.
I agree with that. I think that it's important to just, like you said, by letting your light shine. What does that mean? That means we're not being silent. Silence is kind of an embrace of the status quo, and we can't do that. There's no um, there's no time or space for staying the same. We cannot remain stagnant. So much is changing around us. We have to change with it. We have to evolve. We have to stand firm in celebration of who we are, in celebration of our diversity and our identity, and not be afraid to express the beauty within our identity, and the various things that make it up. But again, within that um, acknowledgement and celebration of our diversity, doing what we can and engaging our colleagues in efforts to continue to move the needle forward, to continue to call out injustices as we see them and as we identify them, and work together, within, like you said, inter and intra, work within ourselves, and then work with our true allies to make progress.
In some ways, by letting our lights shine, we make space for other people's lights to shine. Ella Baker, one of the mothers of the modern civil rights movement, 1950s, 60s, one of her sayings was, give light and people will find a way. Give light and people will find a way. And so what our internal light is, to not let Black joy and Black celebration be extinguished in racism, but make spaces so that the struggle doesn't have to be so hard.
Right.
I want to thank all of you for the time to come together out of your very busy schedules. Dr. Hedman getting ready to sit for exam boards. We really appreciate you, all of you. So
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for bringing us together. It's a great conversation. It's great to meet all of you.
to be
Likewise.
continued.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe, be well,
All right,
be
bye.
strong.